Welcome friends. In this unit, we will discuss library legislation, need and purposes and library legislation in India, a comparison. Library legislation is the law consisting of rules and regulations enacted and enforced by state for running and maintaining public library services within its territorial jurisdiction. It is an instrument for development of public libraries in a planned manner. A public library is an institution which provides free service to all irrespective of caste, creed, age, economic and educational attainment, etc. The public library is the principal means whereby the record of man's thoughts and ideas and the expression of his creative imagination are made freely available to all. The public library is concerned with the refreshment of man's spirit by the provision of books for relaxation and pleasure, with assistance to the student and with provision of up-to-date technical, scientific and sociological information. Need and purpose. To make public library reading accessible and its doors open for free and equal use by all members of the community, it should be established under the clear mandate of law to ensure nationwide provision of public library service. It implies that as access to knowledge is recognized in the civilized world as one of the basic human rights, statutory recognition of this right should be secured for the citizens in the form of library legislation enabling an assured flow of funds to maintain the rhythm of library service. The necessities of the enactment of library legislation are: 1. Provision of universal, standard and adequate library service which may offer to adults and children the opportunity to keep in touch and up to date with the progress in science and arts, is possible only through a properly laid out and well supported statewide network of library system. Library legislation becomes highly essential for the establishment and orderly functioning of a network of public libraries. Second, it has larger funds which allow for a balanced and even development public library service over large areas, irrespective of local variations or imbalances in financial support. Government can ensure this flow of funds by legislation. Legislation is as necessary for the constitution of proper supervisory, advisory and administrative machinery as it is for the provision of steady finance. The library authorities are so constituted that they become responsive to the public. The legislation saves libraries from becoming pawns in the hands of administrative efficiency. Fourth, the law sets up the proper government and management of libraries and ensures the responsibilities of authorities at different levels for implementation of the law in the society. Fifth, public library legislation enacted by welfare government prevents the whims and fancies of the politicians and administrators. Statutory provision of finance also saves public libraries from the whirlpool of party politics and ensures perennial library service. An efficient and integrated library service system can be provided on a permanent footing if it remains immune from political ups and downs. Sixth, library legislation helps to increase and update collection of books and other resources of the library and also helps to develop collection in local languages. 7. Library legislation is essential for the improvement in infrastructure of the public library system in terms of the building and shelving materials and resources and also training for library staff for the uplifting library services and introduction of automation and internet facilities, etc. 8. Legislation ensures the requirement of more staff, recruitment and good pay structure for the library staff. The world experience during the past 100 years has shown beyond any shadow of doubt that the right way to have a stable, uniform, efficient, pulsating and integrated library service can be secured by carefully worked library legislation. Public libraries should be free from political or religious patronage, and they should be maintained from funds levied from the whole tax-paying community and administered by its representatives. The principle that library is an educational concern of the state should be established beyond question. Some states of the USA have incorporated in their constitution the responsibility of the state to promote the establishment and development of free public libraries and to accept the obligation of their support by the state and its subdivisions and municipalities in the preambles to their library laws. Library legislation in India. History. In India, public library movement emerged as a part of mass movement for the benefit of common man. Inspired by the ideas and ideals of European rulers, the philanthropists, social workers, voluntary organizations started establishing public libraries as a part of freedom movement. The first endeavor towards establishment of a bibliographical control on the part of the government and thereby imposing a system over collection of books was made in May 1808 by the then government of Bombay. The government initiated a proposal in that year to register libraries which were to be given copies of books published from the funds for the encouragement of literature. Press and Registration of Books Act was enacted in 1867 by the Government of India. This act provided submission of few copies of all books before government against cost. The amendment of this act in 1890 enabled government to collect copies of books free of cost. The second phase of library movement in India started in 1900. Lord Curzon played the most vital role in this part. Due to his effort, the Imperial Public Library Act was passed in 1902. In 1947, the Imperial Library was converted into National Library. After so many years in 1976, another National Library of India Act was passed to provide administration of the National Library and certain other connected matters. From 1906 to 1911, Sir Sayaji Rao III, the ruler of Baroda state, built up a library system in the state composed of the Central Library, Village Library and travelling libraries. This has occupied a predominant place in the history. In Bengal, Kumar Munindra Dev Roy fought for library legislation in Bengal. From 1937 onwards, attempts towards development and library services began in terms of establishment of new libraries. From the first 5-year plan period between 1951 to 56, library development was initiated towards taking a concrete shape due to the effort of Government of India. Decision of establishing state central library in each state, establishment of district libraries, area libraries, etc. formed the pillars of the future Library Act in India. A short history of the efforts towards making of library legislation in different states is described below. Madras Public Library Act 1948. S.R. Ranganathan's attempt of making Model Public Libraries Act in 1930 may be considered as the first draft of Library Bill for Madras. Madras Library Association presented the Model Act in All Asia Educational Conference at Benares in 1930. It also took the initiative of preparation of a model library bill being encouraged by the then Governor of Madras. The bill was drafted in 1931 by a 3-man committee comprising of K.V. Krishnaswamy Iyer, T.R. Venkatarama Shastri and S.R. Ranganathan. The draft was discussed in all circles, but did not materialize into act. At last, mainly due to the initiative of Ranganathan, the bill materialized into act in 1948. Sri Avinashalingam Chettiar, the then Minister of Education, was especially interested in it. Andhra Pradesh Public Library Act 1960. Hyderabad Public Libraries Act was passed in 1955 mainly due to the initiative of Justice Gopal Rao Ekbothe and K.M. Ujlamkar. In 1953, newly formed Andhra Pradesh with Telangana area of Hyderabad and some part of Madras state had two different Public Libraries Act, namely Madras Public Libraries Act 1948 and Hyderabad Public Libraries Act 1955. In 1960, a new act called Andhra Pradesh Public Libraries Act came into existence, replacing the two acts. In 1976, Government of Andhra Pradesh appointed a committee under the chairmanship of Gopal Rao Ekbothe to review the act, and the committee submitted its report in 1978. The Mysore Public Library Act 1965. Mysore Public Library Act, now Karnataka, was passed in 1965. S.R. Ranganathan drafted a bill for Karnataka in 1958. Karnataka Library Association asked a resolution to have library legislation in the state. The endeavour of the association was responsible for the enactment of Karnataka Public Libraries Act. Maharashtra Public Libraries Act 1967. The first attempt for introduction of Public Libraries Act in the former Bombay Presidency was made in 1936 by Rao Bahadur S.K. Bole, a nominated non-official member of the Bombay Legislative Council. Unfortunately, the bill was not taken into consideration. In 1939, the then government constituted a committee with A. Fayezi as its chairman for development of library network in Bombay Presidency. The committee submitted its report in 1940 and recommended phase-wise establishment of libraries of different categories. The government, after the freedom, according to the recommendation of the committee, started establishing Central Library in Bombay and the three regional libraries. Later in 1957, Maharashtra Granthalaya Sangha prepared a draft library bill and circulated it. The draft was revised in 1965. Ultimately, in 1957, Maharashtra government passed Maharashtra Public Libraries Act. West Bengal Public Libraries Act 1979. Library movement was started in different states throughout the country for the introduction of library legislation and to establish a system of libraries with the effort of Government of India. Bengal Library Association was established in 1925. The association was struggling for the cause of the library legislation in the state since its creation. In 1958, under the chairmanship of S.R. Ranganathan, the Bengal Library Conference was held in Navadvip. A draft public library bill for West Bengal was prepared in the conference mainly with the help of Ranganathan under the enthusiasm of Kumar Munindra Deb Roy, but the draft bill could not be materialized into act. It took another 20 years for formation of a draft public library bill to be converted into Public Libraries Act in 1979. The act has been amended 6 times. Manipur Public Libraries Act 1988. There were about 109 libraries. Imphal Public Library, Manipur Public Library, State Central Library, 5 distinct libraries, 101 voluntary organized libraries before enactment in 1988. In the process of enactment of Manipur Public Libraries Act, the contribution of Manipur Library Association is mostly responsible. Manipur Public Libraries Bill was discussed on 1st August 1988 by the Manipur Legislative Assembly and was passed unanimously subject to modification of some a minor clause. Kerala Public Libraries Act 1989. A lot of attempts were made towards enactment of library legislation in Kerala. The first attempt was in 1947 when, by the initiation of C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, S.R. Ranganathan drafted a library bill and 30 years library development plan for the state. but the bill was not materialized. After several attempts and rejection of the draft bill, Kerala Public Libraries, that is Kerala Granthasala Sangam Act, was enacted in 1989 with its unique features not found in the other Public Libraries Act in India. Haryana Public Libraries Act 1989. Haryana Library Association was founded in 1967. The district library at Ambala Kant was upgraded as State Central Library in the same year. The then State Librarian M.L. Bhagi drafted a public library bill. It was discussed in the meeting of the Haryana Library Association and submitted to the government of Haryana, but no fruitful result was achieved. In 1982, Haryana Library Association held a seminar on public library system in Haryana. In that seminar, a public library bill drafted by Janak Raj was discussed and it was placed before the state government for consideration. In 1988, another public library bill was drafted by N.K. Sharma. The bill was ultimately considered in the Legislative Assembly and turned into Haryana Public Libraries Act in 1989. Mizoram Public Libraries Act 1993. Mizoram Public Library Services Bill was drafted first in 1980, but it was not materialized into Act. Again in 1988, a draft bill was prepared and submitted before the government. Ultimately, in 1993, the bill was made Act, the Mizoram Public Libraries Act 1993. The most prominent role in the establishment and maintenance of public libraries and enactment of the bill was of Young Mizo Associations, that is YMA. Therefore, naturally the association has got a prominent place in the Act. Goa Public Libraries Act 1993. In 1983, the State Library Advisory Board under the chairmanship of Lieutenant Governor K.T. Sattarwala appointed a subcommittee for making a draft of a public library bill for the state. Accordingly, the draft was prepared. In 1994, the bill was enacted into Goa Public Libraries Act. Gujarat Public Libraries Act 2000. In 1964, due to the initiative of Ranganathan, the then Chief Minister instructed the Education Minister to constitute a committee for drafting the Public Libraries Bill for Gujarat. The committee was able to draft the bill and submit it to the government. In 1969, a non-official Public Library Bill was introduced in the Assembly by Mr. Jadeja and Mr. S. Mehta, but due to the dissolution of the Assembly, the bill could not be discussed. In February 1973, another non-official bill was moved by Mr. Maniklal Gandhi, the leader of the opposition party. The bill was rejected in the Assembly by voice vote. Lastly, Mr. M. Jadeja, the chairman of the State Library Advisory Committee, redrafted the bill and submitted to the government in 1978, but it was not materialized into Act. Ultimately, Gujarat Public Libraries Bill was passed in the Assembly in 2001. Orissa Public Libraries Act 2002. In Orissa, different types of public libraries are there. In 1974, a draft bill was prepared by Utkal Library Association and it was submitted to the government for consideration. In the same year, another draft public library bill was submitted before the government by B.B. Shukla. In 1983, a draft bill was again submitted to the government for consideration, which was the outcome of the discussions of a conference on public library planning at Shambalpur University. In 1987, a state-level conference of Utkal Library Association was held. At the end of the conference, Utkal Library Association submitted a memorandum to the Chief Minister with the demand for enactment of Public Libraries Act. Finally, in 1988, Umarani Patra submitted a draft Library Act to the Legislative Assembly as a private bill. Orissa Public Libraries Act was passed in the Legislative Assembly in 2002. Uttar Pradesh Public Libraries Act 2005. Ranganathan prepared a draft public library bill and a library development plan for Uttar Pradesh in 1949. On request of the then Education Minister Sampurnanand in 1958, Ranganathan again met the then Governor V.V. Giri and prepared a revised draft library bill. But the bill was not presented in the Assembly. In 1971, Government of Uttar Pradesh constituted a public library inquiry committee under the chairmanship of R.K. Goswami, the then Education Minister. The committee submitted its report to the government along with a draft library bill. The committee recommended to open a library cell in the Secretariat to look after the matter of public libraries, till a separate Directorate of Public Libraries is formed. Accordingly, government constituted a library cell in the Education Department in 1980. In 1981, another committee under the chairmanship of C.G. Vishwanathan was constituted by the government. The committee again drafted the public library bill and submitted to the state government in 1983. Uttar Pradesh Library Association was very much empathetic over enactment of the bill, and finally the Public Libraries Act was enacted in Uttar Pradesh in 2005. Uttarakhand Public Libraries Act 2005. The Public Libraries Act was enacted in this state in 2005. Rajasthan Public Libraries Act 2006. Rajasthan Library Association was maintaining a constant effort towards enactment of Library Act. A draft library bill was prepared by the Rajasthan Library Association. The bill was submitted to the government in 1965, but the draft was lying in the law department for several years. Finally, at the public library legislation was enacted in Rajasthan 2006. Pondicherry Public Libraries Act 2007 or 2008. The library legislation was enacted in Pondicherry in 2007 and 2008. Arunachal Pradesh Public Libraries Act 2009. The library legislation was enacted in Arunachal Pradesh in 2009. Bihar Public Libraries Act 2007. In 1937, Bihar Library Association submitted to the state government a scheme for development of libraries in Bihar. In 1973, a draft bill was prepared and submitted to the government, but it was reported to be lost. In 1979, it was resubmitted. R.S.P. Singh, the then librarian of State Central Library, P.N. Kaula of Banaras Hindu University and P.N. Doshi took initiative towards materialization of the draft. Accordingly, the state government constituted a three-man committee to revise the draft. R.S.P. Singh revised the bill and submitted to the government. Finally, Bihar Public Libraries Act was enacted in 2007. Chattisgarh Public Libraries Act 2007. Public library legislation was also enacted in this state as that of Bihar as in 2007. Assam. Library development in Assam started after 1947, but it was disturbed by the geopolitical changes in Assam. 4 states were formed from the undivided Assam from 1963 to 1972. From 1974, library development in Assam restarted. In 1983, Directorate of Library Services was formed. Assam is slowly proceeding towards formation of the public library system in the state. First draft of Public Library Bill was made for Assam by S.R. Ranganathan in 1964. In 1977, Assam Public Library Bill was drafted and introduced in the Legislative Assembly, but change of political situation deterred the transformation of the bill into Act. From 1986, fresh attempts were initiated by the Library Association towards enactment of the Assam Public Libraries Act. A draft Assam State Public Library and Information Bill made by a government appointed committee has been submitted and now it is in the process of being accepted. Punjab. The government of Punjab was drafted a public library bill due to the initiation of the Punjab Library Association after independence. In 1962, a draft was prepared by R.L. Mittal and G.L. Trehan, and this was discussed in a conference on library legislation organized by the Punjab Library Association, but no result yielded. In 1964, another seminar was held to discuss the Model Public Library Bill circulated by the Government of India and feasibility of its application in Punjab. After the formation of Raja Ram Mohan Roy Library Foundation, it sent a draft bill to the Government of Punjab, but it is unfortunate that after so many efforts, Punjab has not been able to have public library legislation as yet. Delhi. In 1954, only 1 year after formation of Delhi Library Association, Professor P.N. Kaula, the then Secretary of Association, drafted Delhi Public Library Bill. It was submitted to the Delhi administration for consideration and adoption. It was examined in the legislative department, but the fate of the deal is still unknown. Himachal Pradesh. A public library bill was drafted for Himachal Pradesh. The unique feature of the bill was the involvement of academic library system in the public library system. According to the draft bill, public libraries of all categories and academic libraries of all categories would be under State Central Library. The action of the Himachal Pradesh government towards materialization of the bill into act was not known. Jammu and Kashmir. There are about 14 district and branch libraries in Jammu and Kashmir. Professor P.N. Kaula drafted a public library bill for Jammu and Kashmir state in 1950 with 30 years development program and presented it to the Chief Minister, but it could not be materialized. In 1957, another public library bill was drafted by a committee constituted by government. The fate of the bill is yet to be known. Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh carries the tradition of maintaining good public libraries. In 1946, a draft bill for Central Province was prepared by S.R. Ranganathan. In 1949 and 1961, efforts were made to convince the government in introducing the public library bill in the assembly. According to the advice of Ranganathan, the bill was redrafted and resubmitted before the government by Madhya Pradesh Library Association in 1959 with no fruitful results. In 1968, the 17th Conference of Library Association at Indore supplied enthusiasm towards resubmission of the bill. Before the government in 1977, under the advice of O.P. Raval, Education Minister of MP, in favor of the introduction of the Act, the bill was drafted. The issue was raised in the 4th Conference of Madhya Pradesh Library Association held in 1982, but nothing came out from the government. It is a matter of hope that a good number of Indian states have enacted Public Libraries Act or in a process of enacting it. Some states carry the tradition of library movement from pre-independence period and therefore have a system of public libraries. Some newly formed states have also enacted legislation. These are good signs indeed. None of the countries in which library legislation exists are able to provide entirely satisfactory and effective library services. All of them have problem to some degree despite the fact that there has been revision of laws in most countries. Again, there are many countries without legislation, but they are serving the general public in a better way in comparison to the countries that have legislation. Now, let us summarize the session. In this unit, it is tried to explain the need and purposes of library legislation. In the context of libraries, The Library Act means to give legal provision for establishing a library system, its maintenance, services, functions, right and management under any state or a national government. Library legislation is capable of regulating various organs of public library services. The library legislation has the provision of financial support to the public libraries. But the provision to be made in library legislation would depend upon the social, political and economic environment. From the first 5-year plan period between 1951 to 56, library development was initiated towards taking a concrete shape due to the effort of Government of India. In India, 19 states have so far enacted library legislation and the rest are providing library services without legislation. Before moving to the next session, please try to answer the following questions. Why library legislation is necessary? What do you know about the history of library movement before enactment of Library Legislation Act? What do you know about the historical development of the Madras Public Libraries Act? Write short notes on the Mysore Public Library Act 1965. Books for your references are Corbett, Edmund, 1989, Fundamentals of Library Organization and Administration, Delhi, Oxford and IBM Publishing. Khanna, J.K., 1984, Fundamentals of Library Organization, New Delhi, PSSESS Publication. Chakrabarti Bhubaneswar, 1993, Library and Information Society, Calcutta, The World Press, Kaula P.N., 1961, Library Movement in India, Library Herald, 3-4, 172 to 173. Hope you enjoyed this session. See you next time. Until then, bye.